In May 1999, a 14-year-old girl walked into a Hong Kong police station with a story that would chill officers to the bone. She claimed she was being haunted, not by dreams or imagination, but by the ghost of a woman who had been bound with electrical wire, tortured, and murdered. The police initially dismissed her as a troubled teenager having nightmares, but when she confessed that she had helped kill this woman, everything changed. What they discovered next would shock Hong Kong to its core and become known as one of the most depraved crimes in modern history. Inside a dingy apartment in Tsim Sha Tsui, hidden within an oversized Hello Kitty mermaid doll, was the severed skull of 23-year-old Fan Man-yee, a young mother whose month-long ordeal of torture would horrify the world. This is the story of the Hello Kitty murder. Born in 1976 in Shenzhen, China, Fan's life was marked by abandonment from the very beginning. Her family gave her up as a child, and she was raised in an all-girls orphanage in Ma Tau Wai, Hong Kong. The orphanage became her entire world until she turned 15, when she was forced to leave due to age restrictions. Just like that, she found herself homeless on the streets of Hong Kong. At just age 15, an age when most teenagers are worried about school and friends, Fan was completely alone, struggling to survive in one of the world's most expensive cities. With no family support system and limited options, she fell into drug addiction and was eventually forced into street prostitution just to survive. By age 21, she was working at a brothel called Romance Villa in Sam Sui Bo. It wasn't the life she wanted, but it was the only option she could see. In 1996, she married one of her clients, Ng Shi-yoon, another drug addict. Their relationship was turbulent and abusive. Neighbors would report being woken up by the sounds of their violent fights. But in November 1998, she gave birth to a son, and that little boy changed everything for her. She left her husband, and although she was still addicted to crystal methamphetamines, she left prostitution behind and got a job as a hostess at the Empress Karaoke Club. Hostesses in certain East Asian countries are essentially staff who work at bars and nightclubs and charge a fee for conversation with men and encourage them to purchase more products at the business. Although her new job meant she would be making much less money, she was working to provide a better and safer life for her child. But despite leaving her abusive husband behind, he wouldn't be the last dangerous man in her life. She might have still been alive today if someone from her history didn't catch up with her. Fan's ex-pimp and drug dealer, 34-year-old Chun Man-lok. Born May 17, 1965, Chun was no ordinary criminal. He was a member of the Wo Sing Wo Triad, one of Hong Kong's oldest and most powerful organized crime syndicates. The Wo Sing Wo Triad was established in 1930 and had grown to become one of the big three triad societies in Hong Kong by the 1990s, alongside the 14K and the San Yi On. With over 20,000 members, they were deeply involved in drug trafficking, prostitution, extortion, and illegal gambling. Chun himself had previous convictions for drug trafficking dating back to 1991 and had exhibited problematic behavior since middle school. But Chun wasn't just a criminal, he was a predator who specifically targeted vulnerable women. He operated as both a drug dealer and a pimp, exploiting women's addictions to control them. He had a pattern of grooming young girls as well, including a 14-year-old Lo Ming Fong, known as Ah Fong. She was a girlfriend of one of his accomplices, 26-year-old Lung Xing Cho. Now I say girlfriend because obviously that's what the news reports say, but the fact of the matter is that she was clearly a victim of both Chun and Xing Cho. Lastly, the third accomplice was 21-year-old Lung Wei Lun. Chun's two main accomplices were equally as dangerous. Both these accomplices worked at a retail store near Granville Road before becoming involved in Chun's criminal activities. They were willing participants in what would unfold, showing a callous disregard for human life that would shock even experienced investigators. Perhaps the most tragic figure in this story, aside from Fan herself, was Lo Ming Fong, the 14-year-old living in a world of violence and exploitation. She was about to be led through violence that nobody, let alone a child, should be involved in. Going back to Fan, she had been a regular customer of Chun's drug business, and because of that, she continued to maintain some kind of relationship with him. In early 1999, desperate for money to support her son, Fan made a fatal decision. She stole Chun's wallet, which contained about 4,000 Hong Kong dollars, or roughly $500 US. When Chun discovered the theft, Fan immediately returned the money. She apologized, knowing she had crossed a dangerous man. But Chan wasn't satisfied. He demanded an additional 10,000 Hong Kong dollars as interest, money Fan simply didn't have. She pleaded for more time to raise the money, but Chan had already decided her fate. For someone like Chan, this wasn't really about the money. This was about power, control, and making an example. Fan had committed the ultimate sin in his world. She had shown him disrespect, and in triad culture, that could not stand. On March the 17th, 1999, Fan was abducted from her flat in Lai Yu Estate. The kidnapping was carried out by Chun, his two accomplices, Lung Sing Cho and Lung Wei Lun, and 14-year-old Ah Fong. They took her to apartment number 31 on Granville Road in Chim Sha Tsui, a location that would become synonymous with horror. The apartment was rented by Chun, but owned by two other men who were uninvolved parties in this case. Initially, Chun's plan was financial. He intended to force Fan into prostitution and take all her earnings until she had paid off her debt. The apartment had been decorated with Hello Kitty memorabilia, curtains, bedsheets, kitchenware, and dolls. The innocent cartoon character created a surreal contrast to the evil that was about to unfold. But Chun's plan quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. What began as an attempt to force Fan into prostitution quickly became torture for torture's sake. Chun and his accomplices were heavy crystal methamphetamine users, and their drug-fueled state seemed to remove any remaining inhibitions they might have had. Fan was beaten daily with metal bars and water pipes. She was hung up and used as a punching bag. On one documented occasion, she was kicked in the head around 50 times. Each night when the gang slept, they would hang Fan up by her feet from a hook attached to the apartment ceiling. When the morning came, the men would beat Fan with iron bars and a detached water pipe. When Fan would drift out of consciousness, they would stop torturing her and play video games. They rubbed spices into her open wounds, burned her legs and feet with hot candle wax and melted plastic until she couldn't walk. The psychological torture was equally horrific. They forced her to smile during the beatings and say that she enjoyed them. If she refused, the torture would intensify. They made her consume human waste and urine. They forced her to have sex with clients even as her condition deteriorated. One of the most disturbing aspects was the forced participation of 14-year-old Ah Fong. Chun made her take part in the torture sessions. When later asked about her participation, Ah Fong would say she thought it was just for fun, a chilling indication of how Chun's manipulation had warped her understanding of right and wrong. By early April, Fan's condition had worsened dramatically. She had suffered traumatic shock from the sustained abuse. Her appearance was so changed by the beatings that she was unrecognizable. Clients would no longer pay for her services, so the men simply continued torturing her for their own entertainment. The exact date and cause of Fan's death remains unclear, but it occurred between April the 14th and 15th, 1999. Some accounts suggest she died overnight while her captors were out. Others indicate she succumbed during the day. But on one of those nights, the three men and Ah Fong returned home from the arcade and clubs. It was the evening, so they rested before checking on their victim. When they awoke, they noticed Fan was no longer breathing and her body was cool to the touch. Given the state of her remains, investigators could never determine if she died from traumatic shock due to her injuries or from drug overdose, a detail that would later prove crucial during the trial. When Chan and his accomplices found Fan's body, they were faced with a problem: how to dispose of the evidence. Their solution was as disturbing as the crime itself. The group was in a panic because police entered the apartment complex one floor below to investigate an unrelated crime. Chan Man-lok ordered the entire group to work together and dispose of Fan's body in what Ah Fong recalls. Now she must be destroyed. They moved Fan's body to the bathtub and began the grisly process of dismemberment. Using a saw, they cut her body into pieces, but they didn't stop there. In an attempt to prevent decomposition and the smell of rotting flesh, they boiled parts of her body. The entire dismemberment took approximately 10 hours to complete. Lung Sing Cho, who was now in charge of cooking the head, called Ah Fong to come help. However, she told detectives that her fear stopped her from looking inside the pot. That's when he told her to, quote, pretend you're watching a television show. During this process, the group felt hungry, so they placed a pot on the stove next to the boiling head and began cooking noodles. The same spoon was used to cook the noodles and the severed head. Here's where this case gets its infamous name. After boiling Fan's skull until only bone remained, they sewed it inside a large Hello Kitty mermaid doll. The irony is almost unbearable. Hello Kitty, a symbol of innocence and childhood joy, became the final resting place for a murder victim's remains. The rest of Fan's dismembered body was disposed of in garbage dumps across Hong Kong. Her internal organs were stored in the refrigerator of the apartment. Only her skull, one tooth, and some organs would eventually be recovered by the police. For about a month, it seemed like they had gotten away with murder. The crime went completely undetected by authorities. But in May 1999, something remarkable happened. Ah Fong walked into a Hong Kong police station and told officers she was being haunted by a ghost. But this wasn't any ordinary ghost story. Ah Fong described seeing the spirit of a woman who had been bound with electrical wire and tortured to death. The police initially dismissed her claims as teenage fantasy or nightmares, but then Ah Fong said something that changed everything. She confessed that she had been involved in this woman's murder. Suddenly, the police were very interested in what Ah Fong had to say. She led them back to the apartment where the torture took place. What they found there would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Even these experienced officers were visibly shaken by what they discovered. Ah Fong was accompanying them and pointed them to the Hello Kitty mermaid doll. The stench was overwhelming. Inside the doll, they found Fan Man-yee's skull, along with the plastic bag containing one tooth and some internal organs. The scene was so disturbing that it made hardened investigators sick. Chun was apprehended at his home just 5 days later on May the 29th, where he lived with his wife and newborn child. His wife was questioned but released due to insufficient evidence. Finding the other two took a bit more time. Lung Wei Lun initially attempted to escape to mainland China, but was captured in Guangxi province on the 14th of February 2000 after being placed on Interpol's most wanted list. Long Sing-cho was arrested in Hong Kong shortly after the initial discovery. But the issue was gathering evidence, and that's due to the condition of the remains. The prolonged torture, dismemberment, and boiling of Fan's body had made it nearly impossible to determine the exact cause of death. This would prove to be a crucial weakness in the prosecution's case. The skull was identified through photographs taken during Fan's previous interactions with the police. Dental records and other identifying features confirmed that these were indeed the remains of Fan. Despite the challenges, investigators were able to gather substantial evidence. First, there was the physical evidence, especially the Hello Kitty doll containing Fan's skull, the recovered tooth and organs, and traces of blood found throughout the apartment. Then there was a very first-hand witness testimony of Ah Fong's detailed account of the torture and murder, provided in exchange for immunity from prosecution. While the three men denied intentionally killing Fan, they did not deny dismembering her body, a crucial admission that would help secure their convictions. The fact that the trio had triad connections and previous criminal records helped establish their character and capacity for violence. During the investigation, police also heard from Fan's family. Her ex-husband testified about their troubled relationship and Fan's effort to change her life. Her aunt also provided testimony about Fan's character and circumstances. Hong Kong is a place where drug use is extremely frowned upon and illegal, and being accused of drug use can make others question your character, especially in a legal setting where it could affect the outcome of your trial. So these testimonies were crucial for Fan to provide to the jury that despite her difficult life, she was trying to mend her life, particularly for her young son, who was now in the care of the Social Welfare Department. The trial began on October the 20th, 2000, and lasted 6 weeks. It was presided over by Justice Peter Nguyen in Hong Kong's Court of First Instance. The case attracted enormous media attention, with reporters packing the courtroom daily. Hong Kong had never seen anything quite like this. Such crimes are not common there. But the prosecution faced a significant challenge. They could not definitely prove that the defendants intended to kill Fan Man-yee. The condition of her remains made it impossible to determine whether she died from her injuries or from a drug overdose. However, they built a compelling case that the trio's intention was to kill her around several key points. Firstly, there was the fact that Fan was put through prolonged torture nearly a month, and this torture got worse over time, getting more and more brutal as time went on. Another thing was the really morbid way her body was disposed of in the doll. This showed complete disregard and lack of humanity. All of this coupled with the fact that Ah Fong could confirm finer details of what went on from whatever she could remember. She testified, "They beat her when they were bored. They beat her for laughs. She was broken, and playing with her wasn't so much fun after that. But we carried on anyways. There wasn't anything else to do. The defense attorneys took different approaches for each defendant. For Chun, they argued that while he may have initiated Fan's captivity for financial reasons, he never intended for her to die. For both the Lungs, the defense argued they were following Chun's orders and were not the primary instigators of the violence. Crucially, all three defense teams argued that Fan may have died from a drug overdose rather than from torture, a point they hoped would create reasonable doubt about murder charges. On December 7, 2000, after deliberating on the evidence, the jury reached their verdict. The 8-man, 1-man jury voted 6-3 to convict all three men of manslaughter rather than murder. While the jury agreed that Fan had died as a result of the defendants' actions, they could not determine beyond reasonable doubt that the men intended to kill her. This saved them from mandatory life imprisonment for murder. Despite being convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, all three men received life sentences with the possibility of parole after 20 years. At the time, this was effectively the maximum penalty available for manslaughter. The three offenders stood expressionless in their dark suits as the sentences were read. Psychiatric reports described all three as being remorseless with psychopathic tendencies. Justice Nguyen noted that they were likely to remain a danger to others, justifying the maximum penalty. The sentencing brought mixed reactions from the families involved. Fan's husband expressed satisfaction with the sentences, saying the men deserved to spend the rest of their days behind bars. However, he also admitted feeling confused and distressed. In contrast, Chun's wife thought the sentence was too severe, initially hoping her husband might receive a shorter term. Lung Wai-lun's family was devastated. His sister reportedly suffered a mental breakdown upon hearing the verdict, while his brother became so agitated that he slammed and broke a courtroom door. But the legal proceedings didn't end with the initial sentencing. In 2003, all three men attempted to appeal their convictions but were unsuccessful. The sentences were upheld. However, in 2004, there was a significant development. Lung Sing Cho's conviction was overturned by the Court of Appeal, which found that Justice Peter Nguyen had misdirected the jury. In his summing up, Lung was granted a retrial. At his retrial, Lung pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was again sentenced to life imprisonment. Interestingly, during this proceeding, because he was willing to donate his organs after death, his lawyer noted that Lung had become a reformed person. As of 2024, Chan Man-lok and Lung Wai-lun are still serving their life sentences in Stanley Prison. They became eligible for parole in 2020, 20 years after their conviction, but there is no indication that they have been released. Lung Sing Cho was actually released in April 2014, but his freedom was short-lived. In January 2022, while working as a waiter, he was arrested for indecently assaulting a 10-year-old girl. He was sentenced to 12 months in prison for this offense, showing that Justice Nguyen's assessment of him as likely to remain a danger to others was tragically accurate. Fan Man-yee's remains were finally returned to her family in 2014, 15 years after her death. The infamous apartment building at number 31, Granville Road, in Chim Sha Tsui, was demolished in September 2012. The site stood empty for several years before being redeveloped. In 2016, it was rebuilt as a hotel that still operates to this day. In a darkly ironic twist, the exact location where Fan was tortured and murdered is now occupied by a restaurant, but many locals still find the location unsettling. The Hello Kitty murder had a profound impact on Hong Kong society. This was a city with one of the lowest murder rates in the world. In 1999, Hong Kong recorded only about 1.1 homicides per 100,000 people. Violent crime was relatively rare, and when it occurred, it was usually quick and impersonal. This case was different. The prolonged torture, the sexual violence, and the macabre disposal of the remains was unlike anything Hong Kong had experienced in recent memory. It challenged the city's image itself as safe and civilized. The involvement of the Hello Kitty character added a particularly disturbing dimension to the case. Hello Kitty was, and remains, enormously popular in Hong Kong, representing innocence, childhood, and Japanese kawaii culture. The fact that this symbol of innocence became associated with such brutality created a cognitive dissonance that many found deeply unsettling. Some stores even temporarily stopped selling Hello Kitty merchandise after this case. The Hello Kitty murder stands as one of the most disturbing crimes in modern history. not just because of its brutality, but because of what it reveals about human capacity for evil. 3 men, under the influence of drugs and criminal culture, spent a month systematically destroying another human being for no rational reason. Was justice truly served in this case? The men received life sentences, which was the maximum penalty available for manslaughter. However, the fact that they weren't convicted of murder, despite the month-long torture, remains controversial. Some argue that the evidence of prolonged deliberate suffering should have been enough to prove intent to kill. The early release of Long Sing Cho and his subsequent reoffending raises questions about rehabilitation and risk assessment. His 2022 conviction for CSA suggests that Justice Nguyen's assessment of these men as permanently dangerous may have been accurate. 25 years later, the Hello Kitty murder remains Hong Kong's most notorious crime. It shocked the city, horrified the world, and changed how people thought about safety, innocence, and human nature. If you like my content, please ensure you subscribe, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks as always for watching.